we take it for granted that slavery is wrong. But why we think it's wrong is not so bloody obvious. And so one of the things I wonder about constantly, for example, is the Marxists complain about oppression and slavery constantly, but I have no idea why, within the confines of their ideology, it's wrong. Because in order to believe that slavery is wrong, you have to believe that individuals are sovereign, right? That they should be autonomous, that they have free will, and that they shouldn't be subject to the arbitrary dictates of other individuals. So you have to believe in individuals, you have to believe in sovereign individuals, you have to believe in free will. You also have to believe in intrinsic value, right? Because if you have no intrinsic value, why can't I just impress upon you my will if I can get away with it? You know, you might object, but who cares? That's irrelevant. Why is that relevant that you object? There has to be a reason that's relevant before it's relevant. And so one of the things we know about God by the time the Exodus story shows up is that whatever he is equivalent to the voice that calls a leader to lead his people out of slavery. Or maybe it's equivalent to the voice that calls you to lead yourself out of your own slavery, your own tyranny. You know, and then we think about it as maybe part of the impulse towards, I don't know what, towards freedom, towards responsibility. And, you know, we tend to identify the impulse toward freedom and responsibility as positive, as good. And so to give it a high ethical standing, that drive, that call, isn't an unreasonable thing to do. In any case, God tells Moses that the Israelites need to be free. Now, by that time, we also know something about Israel. So I learned this, I did a series of biblical lectures in 2017, and I learned that the name Israel means those who wrestle with God. And that just flattened me when I learned that, because Israel is regarded as the chosen people. And it's so interesting that the chosen people are those who wrestle with God. Think, well, what does it mean to wrestle with God? Well, it comes from a story of Jacob. Jacob wrestles by a river before he goes to meet his brother, who he betrayed. He wrestles with God on the banks of a river. God, an angel. It's not exactly clear in the text. It's often interpreted as God. And God breaks his hip or dislocates it. But Jacob survives the encounter, although his leg is damaged after that. And then he's renamed Israel, and he'll be the father of those who wrestle with God. Think, well, what does it mean to wrestle with God? Because Israel isn't those who believe in God, interestingly enough. It's those who wrestle with God. And I would say, well, that's what we all do. Because we all wrestle with meaning and purpose and significance, and we all wonder about the reality of ethical endeavor. We wonder about the difference between good and evil. We're tormented by our consciences for not living up to our moral obligations. We shirk our responsibility or don't. We're wrestling with good and evil. And you think, well, why would you damage your hip if you're wrestling with God? And I would say, if you're wrestling with questions like that and all that happens is you dislocate your hip, you got away pretty bloody easy, because it can be a lot worse than that. And so I'd say, you know, who is God to break Jacob's hip? It's like, no, you got it backwards there, buddy. If you're torn into pieces by questions of ethical orientation, and generally those are the questions that tear us into pieces, then mere damage of that sort from which you recover, that's mercy, that's for sure. And so Israel, that's the people who are chosen by God, but they're the people who wrestle with God. And then you think, well, there's got to be an association between that and this idea of being called out of slavery. And so I've been thinking about that. It's like the people of Israel are not to be enslaved. Why? Well, how do you determine the course of your life under conditions of duress? You think about it. You think painfully about it. No. You search your conscience. You try to reconfigure your life. You think in every way you possibly can about the problems that beset you, and maybe you talk over your problems with people that you love, and you try to generate a solution in your discussion, and you do that all honestly. And and that's all wrestling, and maybe you can't do that without freedom. Right? And so if your highest moral calling in some sense is to wrestle with God, then freedom is a precondition for that, because if you're doing what someone is telling you, which is what you would be doing if you were enslaved, then you're not wrestling with God, you're just doing what the tyrant tells you. And maybe it's necessary for this wrestling to take place so that we can continually orient and reorient ourselves towards what is good.